Thank you very much for listening to the Voice of Job Seekers. This is your host, Mark. And if you want to know more about the podcast and the blog, where there's lots of articles, probably more articles than there are podcasts, you can go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com. I have a career psychologist on the line with you, or with us. Her name is Lizette Ojeda. Did I pronounce that correct?
We sure did.
She is a career psychologist for executive women in STEM who want to ignite their career, fulfill their true potential, and have a balanced life. How are you today?
I'm fabulous. Thanks for having me here, Mark.
Good. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And I just want to mention that you're not only a practicing career psychologist and a career coach, and you help women in their careers, and you probably help everybody, really, from what I've seen so far. You're also an associate professor of psychology at the Texas A&M University. Is that still correct?
Yes, that has been there 10 years.
We are discussing overcoming bias and overcoming institutional bias as people begin to approach doing interviews. Some of them are students for the summer, and some of them have been in this area getting prepared. But of course, you're never too prepared, but you're never too ready for some of the things that actually comes at you, and some of the questions that may challenge your tolerance for bias. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I think that it's, something that is always there, and it's hard to know in advance to what degree and how it might impact the opportunities that become available for you during the job seeking process.
Yeah, I think so too. And, it comes at you in many different directions, unfortunately, right?
For sure. It could be based on just one type of bias, so like racial bias, and it could be a combination. So for example, if you are a Black man, there are going to be different biases than if you are a Black woman, because you have the gender piece playing a role in there, and the assumptions that people have about what it means to be someone of that particular race and gender.
Yes. So are all interviewers subject or exposed to unintentional or unconscious bias?
Yes. This is something that is human nature. We are conditioned to have assumptions. Even I do. And I'm pretty good at this stuff. I have immediate assumptions that I make based on what society has fed to us, what we see in movies, what we see in our day-to-day lives. Those messages get ingrained in our brain, and unless we make a conscious effort to try to address it and minimize it, and as soon as it pops, that's what makes the difference. So it's there, but you have to recognize it and then act on it without letting it affect you as much as you possibly can control. Does that make sense?
Yo, that makes plenty of sense. And I have my own biases, but you can only deal with them as you're exposed to them, from a point to where you can be much more critical from them. I think a lot of people the people who are victims of biases will say, stop the unbiases, but it's a work in progress always, for years and years. Am I on the right track?
Yes, it is a work in progress. It's it's kind of like saying, stop getting angry. Well, you can't stop getting angry. There's appropriate and inappropriate ways to show anger. And sometimes the inappropriate ones pop up, and it's recognizing when it's not appropriate, and then how you deal with it when it's not appropriate.
Yeah. Well, it's not something to turn on, turn off. And I think that's what people are starting to realize as they begin to venture out. I think the younger you are, the more shocked you are that it happened right in front of you, and for the question that you're asked. I know that if you're a person of color and you're a woman, you get 10 times of what a lot of black men may face or other uh, people of color.
Hmm. Yeah, and it also depends on what field you're trying to enter. So let's say, for example, I work with a lot of women in STEM. And so, imagine what it's like trying to be in a male dominated career industry as a female engineer, and you add that layer of complexity with ethnicity and race.
Yeah.
And then there are different degrees of biases because you have to also consider phenotype, meaning
Hmm.
appearance, how you appear, if you can quote unquote pass, or to how ethnic you look, quote
Right.
unquote.
Right. Yeah. There's a big one in discussing dreadlocks in particular.
Hmm.
That's been a huge one, and in the state that you're in, particularly in Texas, in reading an article from perhaps a couple of summers ago, maybe even last summer. I think it's been a couple of summers now where, in particular, that state, and there are other states that have said this, but it's okay for an institution to exert bias when it comes to dreadlocks and that way, and that's how much of that is just from misunderstanding and how much is it's kind of hard to say which part of that's misunderstanding and which one is actually an unconscious bias and which one is actually just plain racism, although we can kind of answer that question in a lot of ways.
Gosh, hair is such an important part of people's identity.
Yeah.
And when it's not accepted in certain job environments, it's like trying to suppress a piece of who you are.
Hmm.
And so it's this fine line of how much of yourself do you honor. And if you, especially if you're looking for a job, if you want to have as many opportunities as possible, like, well, do you become more quote unquote acceptable
Yeah.
to corporate America, for
Yeah.
example, by the way you look? And I know some people who, have like beards and,
Hmm.
um, non-traditional corporate, expectations of hair and dress and things like that. And they're like, you know what? I'm okay with not changing myself,
Hmm.
even if it means not getting as many opportunities as I would like.
Right.
And so it's a decision that you have to make.
Yeah, it is.
Um,
And I think there's some industries that kind of tell you up front, like in the hotel industry, in most parts of the hotel industries, and especially when you get to the higher end hotels, the employees, they tell you that you can't have facial hair. For instance, you can't have that beard since you mentioned that. They allow you to have a mustache, a lot of them do, and there's a few that don't even allow you to have a mustache. But I think hair has been some kind of bias because if you look back in the early '70s, and Lord knows I'm probably older than you are, but there's a song that even kind of bookmarks how corporate America feels, or business America has felt in the past. And there's a song called Signs. I don't know if you ever heard the song Signs, but there's a line in there that says, and the sign said, "No long hair, freaky people need not apply." And so, and that was really addressing a lot of it addressed white and black people at that particular time. But there was bias there saying that you don't feel like you can really do the job because all the bias that was associated with long hair, which there still might be some, but not as much. But in this particular case, we're talking about dreadlocks, where there's an association of some will say that we don't like how it presents because it doesn't look neat, if you will.
yeah. And
So,
who identifies what that means anyway?
right, right. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, really, '80s big hair wasn't all that neat. We can argue that, and some may even say, "Oh, it was very neat because it was held by a can of hay sprayer." Flammable, if you will, but we don't have to go that deep into that rabbit hole. But it's fair for if people are concerned, women, people of color are concerned about bias, is there a way to adequately prepare for the bias that you may be exposed to?
Wow, how to adequately prepare for it. I think that knowing that it's possible, and it's one of those things that it's not until it happens that you know how you will react.
Yeah.
But I think when you're prepared to know that it's possible, then that allows you to be more prepared for it, because you don't know how it's going to come. You don't know when it's going to come.
Right.
You don't know the severity, the intensity. You don't know if it's an area where you are maybe more sensitive or take more personally or not. You don't know who's going to say it. You don't know how they're going to say it. So it's really difficult to prepare ahead of time for all these things.
Sure. Yeah, and it happens even before you're even met for the first time. I mean, as soon as somebody sees a resume and they see an address, maybe you live in an urban area or in an area that may require a long train ride or a long bus ride to get there. In that particular instance, you're exposed to bias, because they may prefer, if the business is downtown, they may prefer people walking to the place of business, and maybe consider that heavier than somebody who has a long train ride. But what if that train ride is from a suburb? Then that is also another type of bias. Then say, well, this person comes to this suburb, so that must mean X, Y, and Z, and therefore the interviewer put his he pre-screened his bias, so to speak, to kind of meet the expectation of where somebody lives, or even the phone number, like the different places in Chicago and the different urban large cities where phone numbers mean, one set of phone numbers mean one particular area, another area code means another type of area. So, the bias is kind of like meeting you at the front door sometimes, if you let it, to some extent.
Yeah. And even your name on a resume.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to stand out to make it to the top of the pile. But there's research that shows that even your name, there's research, I don't know if you're familiar with this research, where the resume.
Very much.
Yes. But did you also know that even when you have, so we know that when you have two resumes that are exactly the same, but one has an ethnic sounding name, and the other does not.
Right.
That the ethnic sounding name does not get chosen.
Right.
You know that.
Yes.
But did you also know that even when the ethnic sounding name, the resume for that person, when their resume credentials is better, they still don't get picked as much.
Yes. And
isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
isn't
that is
crazy?
amazing. About 4 years ago, did a whole show on names and what they actually entail in the bias. And there's the studies from Harvard, and there was one done by a major institution in London that were really pronounced, where they did thousands of they tested this theory thousands of times, and the result was always the same, where the Anglo-Saxon name was likely to be chosen to be interviewed rather than the one that was more ethnic. But there's no way to prepare for that, because if you got that far, that doesn't mean you're out of the woods. So if you have perhaps an ethnic name and you got chosen to get the interview, that's a good sign, but that doesn't mean
for sure. I would suggest that once you get in the door and have the interview, to find a way to connect with the interviewer, so that they get to like you, so that they feel like you are relatable, even if you're quote unquote different.
Mm-hmm.
Find a commonality so that they can feel more connected to you. And when they feel more connected to you, they're going to like you more. And if they like you more, well, guess what? You're more likely to get an opportunity.
Yes. And, I think that uh, people are interviewing are also researching them too. They're going checking out
Yeah,
your LinkedIn
exactly.
profile, and there's a bias for not having a photo on your on your LinkedIn profile, because it's unlikely you'll get chosen because they can't tell who you are other than the sparse information you've already put on your LinkedIn profile. So it's best to invest that time and make the best of it. But there's the other thought too, says, well, if I don't get chosen for these set of stances, the ones that will choose me, it does help to know that at least I'm wanted. But you should also dig fairly deep into how people really feel, because there are also those who are looking to fulfill quotas, uh, and just do enough to get by to have that chosen person of color, or persons of color on their staff.
Yes, that's something that happens.
It happens quite regularly. And
Mm-hmm.
your strategies on, how a person of color or somebody who is concerned about bias can research and check out a company or individuals in that company to see if there's a likelihood that I
And it
can
goes
thrive in that company.
beyond going to their website and looking at their mission
Mm-hmm.
and their value statement, because it a lot of times it's just a bunch of fluff.
Yeah.
Going to these websites where you can get the perspective of people who've actually worked there, who give feedback anonymously. That's one. Doing your own research, on LinkedIn, looking to see at the type of people who work there.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of things do they put on their profile? Can you get a sense of what their personality or their openness is? What patterns do you see? Do you see mostly just kind of good old boys network type
Mm-hmm.
of, people? But that's putting a judgment too, right? You're making assumptions. But you could just start to do your research, right, on Google and on LinkedIn, and even if you can also connect with people who work there or who have worked there, that would be good. But also keep in mind that everybody has a different perspective. So the experience of one person might be very different from another.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, something I've learned over the years by guests that I've had on is to look at. It doesn't hurt to look at the website to see if there are people who look like you are in leadership, and to look at press releases and things like that. And if there's any way you can get exposed to that person in person, if that's possible before an interview, my goodness, that's the best research you could possibly do, because then you can really see how they interact and would they interact favorably with someone who
Yes.
looks like you.
Connecting with people as much as possible, because it's not just what you know. You can be the best, but if they don't know you and if they don't like you,
Mm-hmm.
then it doesn't even matter.
Yes, that is very much true. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. Is there anything that you'd like to add to our discussion that we haven't covered along those lines?
No, I think we've covered it all.
Yeah, yeah, I think we did well. Dr. Lizette Ojeda, how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn. I'll be there, and to answer any questions you might have, just send me a message.
Thank you so much for being here on the Voice of Job Seekers, and thank the rest of you for joining us. Peace in the Valley of Love. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.